Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and there is something that really annoys me, and it is my socks. I always seem to wear out the heel on my sock before I wear out anything else. So you know what? I decided to do something about this today, and I'm gonna darn my socks. Let's get started. So what are you gonna need to darn your socks? Well, the first thing you're gonna need are some messed up socks. And here you can see I bust out the heels on all of my socks, and I got a pretty sizable hole there. This pair is exactly where I think it's absolutely perfect to do a little repair. This is before it forms a really big hole. This area is worn, but not actually wholly yet. So that would be a perfect place to put a patch. And it'll be a lot easier to fix it because it's in that state. When the holes get really huge and gaping like this, that's when they get a lot more challenging to fix and repair, because you're going to need a bigger and bigger hoop in order to kind of ring around it, and that gets a little challenging because the sock is such a small thing. This is what's interesting. Obviously, I put more weight on one side of my feet than the other, or maybe I don't wear these socks at the same time that often. But this one's not actually got a hole in it, while this one is totally busted out. Now, my son always busts out the toes of his socks, and here you can see this is probably his big toe busting through there. When it gets to this point, and obviously the sock is so stained and nasty, and this is just a cheap, cotton sock, this is probably something that we just normally throw away. It's really these nicer socks that I really enjoy wearing, where all the rest of the stock is still in great shape. That's really what I'm going to bother to fix. But I want you to see how I hoop this and how I get it ready to go. So let's get back to the materials that you're going to need. You're going to need some sort of hoop to seal up the fabric and lock it in place. And this is a little hoop that came with my machine, and my machine's kind of an older machine, so I think this was a more common attachment maybe in the 1980s when my machine was built. So how this works, I'm going to take this silver hoop part and slide it in here and try and center up that hole. And this is what I was talking about with when the hole gets way too big, it can be really hard to center that up, number one. And then number two, if it's too big for that little hoop, then it's probably not gonna work all that well. So there we go, that's it centered up here. I've got all the rest of the sock down here on the end, and then I'm gonna pop that. I'm just gripping, there's like little pinchers on the end, and I'm just gripping that so that way it can pop inside. So that would go face down on the machine, and then you take the sock and roll it like a tube sock all the way down to get into the center. And so that would be where you put it on the machine and start stitching. And yes, you're gonna have to kind of hang on to it like this and open that out like this in order to get in there and stitch that hole closed. So you can see how, waiting until it gets super huge, that hole gets gigantic, that's really not the best thing. And you might not have this attachment for your machine. So what do you do then? Well, I looked around at the store and I could only find an embroidery hoop that went down to this size. I think this is a 4-inch embroidery hoop. This works okay for the heel on like a bigger sock. I was able to play around with this and get this to work a bit, but as you can see, this is probably going to do a little bit of stretching just to get it in properly. Let's see if I can hoop this real quick here for you. So I just slid it into the sock, and then now I'm going to pop the outer part of the frame on top, and it's kind of stretching things just a bit. There we go. And then now let's see if I can pull that out and around, and I'll probably have to hold it when I'm stitching on the machine. I have to grip it and hold it out like that. So that's an option too. And that works for heels. I don't think that would work very well for toes. So I looked around in my house, just, okay, well, what's another option? What's something that more people might have on hand if you don't have an embroidery hoop, you don't have an attachment that came with your machine? And I realized that a mason jar lid, this is a wide mouth mason jar lid, this was just the absolute perfect size. It's a 3-inch hoop, and that was just absolutely perfect to fit. And I think this would work for toes or the heels. So here's one of the socks that's just slightly threadbare, and this is the one I'm going to stitch in the video just because it'll be the easiest to demonstrate this for you. So how do we get this locked in place? Well, another hardware store find. This is a pipe clamp, and this is just a 5-inch pipe clamp that you can pop on and around that mason jar lid. There we go, and then just grab a screwdriver and tighten it up. So that's an alternative to an embroidery hoop or any kind of specialized attachment that you have on your machine, and that will work just fine too. Just tighten that up nice and tight, and then you can really pull that fabric down and around. And I like that little bit of a higher lip that you get with the mason jar lid here. I think that just is going to make it a lot easier. Okay, so what do you do about that giant hole in the center? I mean, we've got this massive, that's the size of a quarter, you know, what do we do to seal that up? Well, you want to look around in your sewing room or just look around in your fabric store and find some stretchy knit fabric that's a similar weight, and if you want to get picky, a similar color to your socks. I'm not going to be too picky, and I kind of like the way this looks whenever it's repaired. Let me see. This one, you can see I've already repaired with this fabric, and this is just a lightweight knit jersey. And you can see what that's going to look like. And I'm stitching it with white thread just so you can see what it's going to look like. If you wanted to find a dark blue knit, obviously stitch it with dark blue thread. And this would be almost invisible. You wouldn't be able to tell that it had been patched. But I kind of like the idea of a contrast. I actually wish I had some like hot pink or red, you know, some red fabric that would go on my heels, you know, spice it up a bit. But this will work for now. So I'm just going to slice a little rectangle here about the size that I need. And when I take this to the machine, that will go on the bottom, and then flip it over and we'll stitch from the top. Now, of course, you could do this by hand. I've heard from many different sewers and quilters over the last week about a vintage wooden egg or mushroom shaped object. You can find these in antique stores, and you would kind of pop that underneath the heel and hand stitch these holes closed. And that's an option too, but I really want to try sock darning on the machine. So let's take this little guy over. I've got my little homemade metal hoop here made from a mason jar lid and a pipe fastener, and I'm going to grab a scrap of fabric and we're going to darn this sock. So I'm here at my machine, and you know, sock darning is just a little weird. We're actually going to be putting our machine into a slightly different situation, a different set of settings. First thing, you're going to need a darning foot. This is a specialty foot that is designed to hover over the surface of whatever you're working on. And it's designed to hover because we need to be able to move the sock in all different directions in order to stitch thread and stitch that patch into the hole really securely. So I'm going to put this darning foot on, but I'm going to actually wait until the sock is on the machine before I put that on because it's a little tricky to get the sock in place. Now, to make the hoop and the sock move really easily, I'm going to place a Supreme slider over my machine like this so the hole lines up with the needle hole in the center, and that's going to cover up the feed dogs on the machine. And those feed dogs are the little teeth that commonly feed fabric forward. Well, we actually don't need them for this technique. We want to be able to move the sock in all different directions. And you might be wondering, okay, well, those feed dogs are bouncing up and down. Aren't they going to damage this thing? Well, they will, but if you turn your stitch length down to 0, then those feed dogs are going to just bounce up and down. They're not actually going to feed. And there's one other thing you can do if you want to. You could set your feed dogs off. You could drop them. I don't do that. I just don't feel like it's really necessary. Once I set my stitch length to 0, that's pretty much all I feel like I have to do. Okay, so now I'm going to grab my sock and slide it here under the needle. So it's a little bit of a fiddly process. You might even want to take your needle out to do this because it can get caught up on the sock. It can get caught up on your hoop. So just play around with that, get into the center, and then once you're in the center, then you're going to attach your darning foot. And I have to say, this is the one and only time that I found a downside to the simple way that feet attach on my machine. This is a Bernina machine, and the feet attach with a little latch. Well, I have found that sometimes the edges of the sock will pull on that latch, and my darning foot has flopped off in the middle of a darn, and that is not really fun. So if you have a machine where the feet screw on, that's actually better, I think, for this particular technique. Okay, so I've got my little scrap of fabric here, and it's really up to you which way you put it, whether you put it on top and set it over the sock, over the hole, like this. You know, it's down in there. This is kind of deep down in there, and it's a little dark. Turn on a light here, so hopefully you can see just a bit better, and you can see that fabric down inside, or you can slip it underneath the sock like that. And I played around with it both ways and haven't really found one way better than the other. In this case, I put the patch on the outside of the sock and stitched it from both sides. I stitched it from the inside and the outside. On this one, I placed the patch to the inside of the sock, and I believe I stitched it just to the inside. Now, these are my son's ratty socks that I was experimenting with, and I took these inside and asked him to, be my control group of one and give me an opinion, and he said he liked this one better, where the patch was to the inside. And I have to question whether that might just simply be because that's a smaller patch and it's not as much, messed up and stitched. This one's really huge and clunky, so it might just be simply that was the only difference that, made him like this one better. So, you just kind of have to experiment and play and see what's going to work best for you and what you like the feel of better. So I'm going to try it with the fabric face down, and that's just kind of, this isn't really a hole this time, this is more just a very thin spot on the sock. So I'm opening this up and spreading it out so I can see, and hopefully you can see too. I'm going to grab my thread here. There we go. All right, so got my darning foot in place. I'm going to watch out for that little latch, make sure that the sock doesn't pull on it. I'm going to drop the foot down and drop the needle down and bring it all the way back up again. That pulls up a loop, that's your bobbin thread. And then you tuck both underneath the foot. Okay, so now comes the fun part. We're actually going to start stitching. So here we go. I'm just going to put my foot down, and then as I'm stitching, I'm moving the hoop. And I'm just going to go in a gentle zigzag pattern all around the heel, and it's going to be a continual stop and shift. I don't want the fabric to go lumpy or bumpy. Whoop, whoop, whoop. I'm feeling, the needle bar's hitting the edges of the hoop here, and I was feeling that, so you got to watch out for that too. There we go. I think this is one of those things where it's a little slow, but as you get the hang of it and do more socks, it's going to get easier and easier to do. Spread this out again. Stitch a little bit more. And the pattern that I'm making, I'm just kind of zigzagging back and forth. You can also just spin in circles. Let me show you a circular motion here. Spreading this out so hopefully you can see just a little bit better. So kind of spin around in a circle. I call this cat hairball filler. It's also something I use when I'm quilting a quilt too, just to help, fill in background areas and stuff. So this is really interesting. It's, it's sealing a hole. You want to throw a lot of thread at it. You want to stitch this and lock those two pieces of fabric together. Now you might be wondering what to do with your thread tails. I played around with this a bit and I found you can just clip them off short. Just go back over that area where you clipped them and stitch over it a few times. So here I'm going to spin around and around. I don't want to stitch in place too much and make it really dense and thick, but I also don't want it to not be enough thread to hold the patch to the sock. We're darning with a combination of the replacement fabric, the blue fabric that we're adding, that knit, and the thread that's going on here. And you might be wondering what thread I'm using. I'm using Isocord polyester embroidery thread. It's very, very durable thread. So it's going to last, however long these socks continue to last. That will definitely work well. And then the needle that I have in my machine is my usual favorite needle, and that is a Universal 8012 just a regular plain Jane needle. You can use it for just about anything. So I'm spinning around here right along the edges of that. And if you have cut your patch to the exact size and shape that you want, just go on ahead and stitch off the edges. Kind of zigzag off the edges of the patch, and that will bind it really nicely. But watch out. Watch this. See how I have an open toe on my foot? If I kind of stitch in there, it's kind of getting tucked up underneath and the fabric can go a little bunchy. So watch out for that. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Those prongs of my foot are actually getting a little bit in trouble. So I'm wanting to secure that down. There we go, stitched out of that area. So I just wasn't satisfied. You could really see what I was doing. So here, you can see this movement. It's just, simple circles. Just think of like scribbling on your paper, only we're moving that hoop round and around. And the machine is not doing any work. If I take my hands off this and stitch, you can see it's not going to go anywhere. I've got to actually push it and make it go around in order to make this design. And you can zigzag back and forth. That sometimes feels just a little easier, just to zigzag back and forth. But just watch out if the fabric catches on the prongs. If you have an open toe foot like mine, it might catch on those prongs, so watch out for that too. So that's looking really good. I think this is just about done. It's sealed in that weak spot, that really ratty looking spot on the heel, and I think that this is going to be enough. So I'm going to take it off the machine, reach in here, and take off that foot first. And again, I feel like with this, I can clip the thread tail short. I stitched over all of these spaces enough that that's okay. And I'm going to tilt this to the side and just pull it out around that needle. Again, if you feel like you need to, take the needle off too. That's fine. So there we go. That's what the sock's going to look like from the outside, from the outside that you see, and then to the inside, you've got a little extra fabric that we need to clip away. So I'm going to loosen this up. I love these little pipe fittings. I think I'm going to start playing with the stuff I can find at the hardware store a lot more often. I think that was so useful. Okay, so I'm going to pop out my mason jar ring and then turn the whole thing inside out, and then just grab a pair of scissors and carefully trim away this extra fabric that's loose. You can also re-hoop it if you have more space. Like it's looking a little bit ratty down the length of that sock too. I might want to put a longer patch in, but I think this is going to do okay for this sock at least. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed learning how to darn your socks. I don't know about you, but this is one of those things that just drives me crazy. And now that I know I can do this and fix my socks quickly, it's definitely going to be something I get in the habit of doing. I did notice as I darned a lot of socks for this tutorial that it's a lot easier if you catch it before that hole gets really, really big. The bigger the hole, the more challenging it is to darn and seal up. You're going to need a bigger patch of fabric to kind of fit in there, and then you're probably going to feel it in the finished sock. And I don't know about you, but I really can't stand it when I can feel something scratchy on my toes. So that's just me. You might want to just keep an eye on that and go on ahead and repair your socks before they get too holy. Okay, there's so many sock puns that we can throw out here, but I'm going to stop there. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial and that you'll come and check out my website to learn more about sewing and quilting. You can find it at leahday.com. I also have all of the tools that you noticed in this video, as well as books and videos, all kinds of things to guide you through learning how to sew, learning how to quilt, and taking this craft to the next level. So I hope you'll come and check out my website and learn more at leahday.com. Until next time, let's go quilt.